Summertime is often a time of family vacations and taking some time to kick back and relax. Today, we are going to be talking about a unique way to rest and restore our mind and spirits that could definitely work into your summer plans. Hi, welcome to Rekindle XM, where we talk about stress, burnout, and effective ways to recover from the ashes of burnout and rekindle our inner fire. I'm your host, Michelle, and along with me today is my husband, Brian, and our very special guest, Pat Mingarelli. So today's episode is going to be a little different in that we will be talking from a specific spiritual viewpoint. Regardless of your spiritual beliefs, we hope this will be helpful to you as you consider your own spiritual and emotional well-being. So Pat, thank you so much for joining us today. We met,
Thanks for having me.
a couple years ago, at least a year and a half ago. It's been a while, but
Yeah.
do you remember that? We actually met in a class. So we were in an entrepreneur class together. Pat just has a really interesting story. And Pat, so you're a professional photographer.
Yes.
And you've enjoyed, it sounds like, photography and nature since you were young. So you actually have a professional degree in photojournalism from Bowling Green State University in Ohio. And then after graduated, you've worked with a newspaper and an international magazine. We just found out you've worked as a real estate photographer. You've done a number of things with photography throughout your career. And then right now, you're focusing more on freelance and nature photography. You are also helping with some classes for colleges and community organizations. Sounds like you're doing some work with high schoolers. So you've got a lot going on. But one of the really neat things that you do, and it's very unique, is that you are now trying to help others understand how they can use photography, and particularly nature photography, to draw near to God. So I think that's an amazing and really unique purpose. Pat, is there anything else you'd like to share about what's going on and tell us where you're from and maybe a little bit about your family life? And you're our neighbor, so we are originally from Colorado, so you're a neighbor of ours.
Yeah. I live in Nebraska, on the eastern part of the state, just south of Omaha, in a town called Bellevue. And I'm married to my wife for 19 years. We're coming up on. And we have two kids in high school. So, and a dog. We have a dog too. And just, so you mentioned a lot about kind of my background too. And we enjoy being outside as a family when we can. My son and I is in a scout group called Trail Life USA. We go camping and hiking with the group. And so that's kind of a part of our life. We put it into our kids from the beginning to get them outside, and we hiked and we like doing that. And so that's a little bit about me. And I have been teaching. You mentioned teaching in community colleges. I started that almost 20 years ago. Was asked to kind of fill in for another person who was teaching a class, and he got another job, and so I started teaching his class, and I did a lot of continuing education, adult education, however you want to reference it. And then I also taught semester-long classes in photography as an adjunct. So I got a lot of teaching background in photography. And I also taught at a zoo. I taught kids at a zoo, and I taught adults at a zoo, and did workshops and things like that. And I just kind of realized as I went along that I wanted to do something more than just teach people the nuts and bolts of photography. And I realized also that there's a spiritual side to it when we seek that out. And I began doing that. And I also have written a book kind of connected with that about drawing near. It's just called Drawing Near. It's a devotional book about meeting God and his creation. So that's some of the stuff I've got going on.
Right. And congratulations as a first-time author. We know
Thanks.
That is super exciting. And I've been following your blogs and actually took a little bit, like a short course from you about nature photography and using that to find that spiritual rest. So congratulations, and excited about this current venture that you're on. It sounds like you still have a day job, but you are also working on making the spiritual photography a side business, or are you hoping to actually take that and make it a full business at some point?
I am looking to make that a full business. Most of my life, I've done photography and just had a different opportunity came up where I'm working in a school system and photography. I still do the nature photography is, kind of my heart and soul, and it's what I love to do. And I also still do sports photography and portrait photography uh, when I get opportunities to do that. But the real focus of driving me right now and the vision that I have is to help people draw near to God through nature photography. And it's not just the people with the mirrorless and the SLR cameras, it's people who use their phone that are attracted to this, that want to. So it's kind of hit me by like, oh, they want both. They want to learn how to take better pictures and they want to learn how to connect with God as they're doing it. And it doesn't matter what camera they have. So that's kind of like, that's fun. I've got a little bit of a story with that. I mentioned that my son is in a scouting group, and last summer we went to the Boundary Waters in Minnesota as a week-long trip where you're just out on the water. There's no cars. You only take the canoe and you portage from lake to lake, and so you're out there. And I didn't want to take my photography my regular gear because one, it would be heavy when we had to do the portage. But the big reason was I didn't want the canoe to go over and my gear to go in, which I would have it in a dry bag. But when it's in a dry bag, it's not accessible. So I only bought my phone. And so I took all my pictures with my phone. Did I have moments where I'm like, I wish? Yes, but the phone did a great job. And I think they replaced a lot of those old point and shoots cameras. Maybe not replacing the high end cameras, but they're replacing the point and shoots as what they're doing.
Yeah, which is what most of us are doing on vacation. So before we dive in, we've got some questions, and we're going to dive deep into spiritual photography, but I do want to frame this up. So Brian and I and our partner Masha, who's not with us today, we are also first-time authors, and we wrote a book for people who are burned out. So it's called Rekindle. We talk about a 4-step approach to recovering from burnout or just, chronic stress. Not everyone's at that complete point of burnout. But the first part is we talked about recognizing when you are flamed out. So when you are getting to that point of too much stress. And then the second part is talking about investigating the cause of that stress. The third part of the book then goes into actually rekindling, which is using helpful coping methods. And this is what caught my attention, and part of the reason we wanted to talk to you today is because in this Rekindle section we talk about using supportive coping, and one of those is exercise, nutrition, getting enough rest, and we define rest in a non-traditional way. So yes, there's sleep that is restful, but there is also 7 other forms of rest. And so part of what we're going to talk about today is some of those other forms of rest and how you can bring those into your life through nature and photography. The fourth part of our book, we talk about erupting with passion and purpose. And I also think you have an interesting story there about, kind of redefining your purpose as you've gone through your career. So we're going to kind of be camping in that third and fourth part of, those steps to burnout, where we're talking some about rekindling and rest and about finding passion and purpose. That's sort of what we're going to be going through today as we go through your story. So, Pat, you've always been interested in nature photography. It sounds like you've always found some benefit to us. Tell us a little bit about when did you first realize that for you, photography was more than just a profession? When did you realize that you were finding this spiritual renewal in nature photography? And just tell us a little bit about what that does for you.
I think that spiritual rest renewal through nature photography, I was experiencing that before I knew I was experiencing that, if that makes sense. I worked years ago, I worked as a photojournalist, first for a newspaper and then with a magazine. And with that magazine, I had friends that were, it was an organizational magazine, which means it basically the mouthpiece of the organization went to people who were involved in some way. It wasn't for the general public necessarily, but other people I knew in that organization, friends of mine, we were all young men at the time, and we liked the outdoors. And so we would go hiking, camping, and things like that. And I thought, I'm going to being a photojournalist, I'm going to document our trips just for fun as a photojournalist would. But and part of that, I would be taking pictures of what we were experiencing in nature. And I'd get up before anybody else and I'd go out and take pictures. And these times alone out in nature, this is kind of the first, and this was a long time ago. And I was experiencing this peace, this time of rest, even though I was getting up early while everybody else was still sleeping. Because as photographers know, that's one of the best times to take pictures is to get up when the right before the sun gets up, get up early, get out there and take. So even though I was getting up early, I was experiencing a different form of rest, which was not sleep, but was just this contentment, this peace that of just, yeah, just probably what your book talks about. And I was experiencing that. And as I went on with my time, I eventually left that magazine and began doing more and more nature photography for a different purpose than I'm doing it now. And I was still experiencing this rest, this stress release, and what all that would mean, let going of frustration because I was out there and I was just taking pictures and I was forgetting about everything else. And finally, after doing that for years, I realized I was connecting with God because I was having conversations, prayer time. Conversations with God is a prayer time. And I was doing that and just bringing things in my life before him as I would hike a trail or as I would photograph things. I would just was thinking about God and when I would see things that I was photographed, that would just help me build on what make God more real to me instead of just, I read it in the Bible and this is what it says God is. God is a rock. It talks about that in the book of Psalms. And then when I'm outside and I'm photographing this rock and I'm really not just walking by and looking at it, but I'm thinking about the rock and I'm looking at it artistically and compositionally and just framing it. So I'm really studying the rock as I photograph the rock. Well, I'm really thinking about what does this rock mean? Well, to me, it looks everlasting. To me, it looks strong. To me, it looks like something I can stand on and be firm. And if there's a storm, I can find a little crevice in that rock and stay out of the lightning and the thunder. And so when you see God as a rock in the Bible, well, now all of a sudden that comes alive to me. What that means is God is my rock. So sometimes I forget the original question you asked, but I think we're getting there.
No worries. No, I think that's amazing. I've seen many of your pictures and the devotionals that go with them, and being able to put that visual piece to words that sometimes is so helpful for us. So Pat, I'm going to ask you, and Brian, jump in, but I want you to give us a little mini class. So just real quick, but I know when I took your class, you talked about this concept of wonder, and I think that's something in our day of age. We're so busy. We're running around. We don't take the time to stop and just wonder and to really take in our surroundings. And one of the forms of rest that's talked about, and there's actually a book called Sacred Rest that has 7 forms of rest, but spiritual rest is one of them. Taking that time for spiritual discipline and practices. One of the others is sensory rest. And we're so inundated with electronics and sounds and noises and traffic, and especially if you're in a big city. So there's also this idea of sensory rest where nature can definitely help with that. So can you talk us and just give us some of your talking points when you talk about wonder and what that means in the sense of nature?
Wonder it's a concept of when you go deeper in something, and I think today when we wonder tells us a lot about who a person is when we think about what we wonder about. And it's when we wonder about something, we go deeper with whatever that is. I think of it sometimes as adults, we lose our sense of wonder. Even as we get older and older, we're kids, very young kids have this real strong concept of wonder. Their eyes glow, they get big. And as we get older, we kind of lose it. But the thing about wonder causes us to pursue, to go deeper. And if we don't wonder anymore, we kind of lose a little bit of our zest, our zeal. If we don't wonder about God, then we're not pursuing God. If we don't wonder about our spouse, we're not really pursuing our spouse anymore. Because when we're new in our relationship, that wonder of a spouse is like we're on the phone with them, okay, they're texting and everything like that. But wonder can cause us to go deeper. And with photography and getting outside, when we look at nature, we could wonder about it, and we can disconnect from that screen that so many people are on, and which just how life is today. It's so, things are always coming at us, and we go outside and we wonder, and we could walk and through the woods, and I like to say, we could wonder as we wander, and we look at things that are there, and we could see a tree and just wonder. I was really stressed about some things going on in my life, and I'm not going to go into those details, but I went out and I was out with my camera. I'd like to say I did what I shouldn't do, because the world tells us to take care of the problems when we got the problems. And I went to go on a hike. I just went out and brought my camera, had my camera there. And at the time I was about halfway through that hike and decided it's time. Did have to be responsible and go back. There was these big old cottonwood trees, and I'm looking at the cottonwood trees, and I get caught in a sense of wonder about them. And cottonwoods grow really fast for the large trees that they are, and they get really thick bark if you ever looked at them, and I was just lost in the wonder of that. And where did my problems go? Where did my stress go? They were gone, because I was wondering. I caught up into wondering about the cottonwood trees and how they come from a tiny, tiny seed, and that tiny seed that God makes them grow from that. And photography, I've learned that could help us wonder all the more, because I was talking about the mountain when I'm photographing the mountain, and when we wonder about what we're photographing, even if it's a small flower, it takes us in. And if we allow ourselves to really focus in on that and contemplate what it is and how God's made it, and that's what we want to capture in our camera as we continue to wonder, we could think about God. We could think about the flower. We can think of it. Why is it beautiful? Why is this flower beautiful? Why do I think it's beautiful? I know why things like bugs and birds would be attracted to a flower, because they found nectar. Like hummingbirds find nectar, and bees find pollen and nectar, and so they're attracted to this thing. But why is it beautiful for me? And I could wonder about that and get drawn into it, and I'm attracted to it, and it could think about, God made this, and why did he make it the way he did? And as we wonder, because when we cease to wonder, we cease to pursue something. And if we cease to wonder about God and all he has done, then we cease to pursue God, or whatever it is in our life. And I mentioned the spouse, we've ceased to, pursue our spouse or whatever it is. But wonder can just really enhance our lives. It could make us, yeah. Do you have a question, Brian?
Yeah, I was going to take you back to where you said you decided to take your camera and go on a hike, even though you felt like you shouldn't, and because you were feeling stressed out. I don't think that was necessarily a wrong choice, because there are times that you need to step away, and you took your time, you went out, you found something to focus on, but that also gave you had your time, you had your wander, you had your place with God, but during that time, you were also de-stressing, and you were subconsciously working on the issue, whether you realized it or not.
Yeah.
So,
and I haven't heard you use this word specifically, but I'm curious too, if sometimes our brains, we get so involved thinking about whatever's going on in our work lives, our relationships, our normal life. But when we step away from it and, we kind of clear our brains, like, I wonder if we also don't gain clarity. Have you ever felt like, it sounds like you've gained clarity from the spiritual perspective as you've thought about, like who made this rock and thought about God in context with that. Do you feel like clarity is also part of this? And it just came up to me because you're saying, you're not thinking about the problems, but I'm just curious if it gave you clarity.
Well, what Brian touched on, you're elaborating on, and it does bring clarity. There's a book, another book you referenced, the book about rest, and there's a book about, it's called Mind Your Mindset by Michael Hyatt and his daughter. But in that book, Michael talks about how he was trying to write a presentation or something like that, and he was stuck on it and couldn't do it. And his wife said, just go to bed. And so he went to bed and he came back in the morning and he was boom. And he goes from that story, he talks about how we disconnect from something that our conscious mind stops working on it, but our subconscious mind continues to work on it. And when we go, and I know this for myself to be true, when I go outside with my camera or just on a bike ride, which I like to do, we go away from it subconsciously, but our subconscious keeps working on it. And all of a sudden we get this, or we feel this peace, and then it just comes to us. Or even if we do continue to think about our problem or what we're trying to solve, or when we go out into the wilderness, we just get a different perspective of what's going on. And I've had times in my life where I've been working on something and I've gotten the answer when I was totally away from the computer, totally away from the notes, totally away from anything. Although I didn't completely shut it down, I was still kind of asking God, what's the answer here? And I get the answer when I'm somewhere else, when I'm not in a work environment. And I think there's definitely a science behind that too. But even though you're thinking about the problem and you're bringing it, as a Christian, I bring it before God, but even if you're just going around in your head, that problem, separating yourself from the rest of the environment of the problem, I guess, when you get outside, you still release yourself from the stress. You're still finding that rest. And I know that's true for myself. And I often get an answer because
when you're feeling this way, what's your favorite type of nature to photograph, and that gives you that? Like for me, it's water. I love waterfalls. When I was feeling stressed, I'd go find a waterfall. Just the sound of the waterfall. Even taking pictures. I love taking pictures. I'd slow down my camera to get, make it look like it was a sheet and all that stuff. And that was my place of true rest, because water, this is the sound of water running and waterfalls was that for me. I enjoy all of nature, but is there a specific area of nature that really brings that to you?
I don't have a specific area of nature that brings it to, I just, maybe I do, and that's in the woods. And maybe it's not where I'm going to find any kind of vista to photograph, but walking on a trail would be surrounded by woods. The only way I can see in front of me, behind me, is because the trail's there. But if I look this way and I look that way, I see woods. That is probably the place I like to go and find the most peace, even though, may not have me anything to photograph and not show me anything to photograph. But I really often do like to take pictures of the woods because of the depth that I see there. And I relate that to God in that it looks like I don't know where it goes. Even though I may be in a small wooded area that's a couple square miles or whatnot, but when I look at that wooded area, I could still get this idea of where does that go? I can imagine something different, even though it's about God. I can imagine the depth and the richness. I wrote a blog post recently of being in the woods and how it reminded me of my heart. I started thinking of what was the Garden of Eden like? Because it was really green. We experienced a lot of rain. And I was like, what was the Garden of Eden like? So to answer that question is the woods, deep into the woods and walking down a trail. And yeah, I just feel like that's my place. But I like all nature areas. I like
Yeah.
But the woods are,
As a as a Western Kansas person where there was no woods growing up, that uh, the hardest thing for me when I moved to Denver and would start hiking in the mountains is like, what's the point of this? I can't see anything. It's all wood. So we're diametrically opposed there, but I'm glad that works for you.
yeah.
Well, and I think you bring up something between the two of you, which, and I have an aside about paths, but first of all, which is that there are different parts of nature that speak to different people. And this is something we found overall with how people react to stress and how they cope with stress, is that part of it is knowing yourself and knowing what speaks to you, what helps you. Like Brian, it's waterfalls, and, you know, he drags me quite willingly because I'll hike anywhere, but, you know, he drags me to every waterfall that, you know, that we can find. But, you know, you like the woods. Some people like the ocean. There's sort of different environments that are very restful for different people. So I think it's interesting that,
Or like Michelle, she won't let me live anywhere that the mountains aren't at least 30 minutes away.
I'm a mountain person. And, you know, Pat, okay, here's my aside. Here's what I was going to comment back to the paths in the woods. I think, at least for me, the woods and the path in the woods is sort of a metaphor, because in life, like, we don't know where we're going. We don't know what's around the next bend. Often we want to, but I think from a spiritual perspective, we believe in a God who does know. So there's sort of that metaphor of God knows what's around the corner. He knows what's coming. But whenever I see photos of paths in the woods, that's what comes to mind for me. So I think there's different meanings for different people, but I agree with you. I like woods, which Brian can attest to. Okay, that was a total bunny trail, but
Well, okay, I'm just going to make a comment about the trails. For me, I love photographing pathways, and they could be in the middle of the woods, or they could be, you know, out on the prairie, a pathway, or it could be in grassland, shrubland, where, you know, there's some trees and whatever. I like photographing pathways, and pathways to me represents my relationship with God, because on a pathway in the photograph, I see beauty, I see mystery, I see peace, I see wonder, and I want to walk down that path. I want to go down there, especially because, you know, the pathway will curve through a photograph sometimes if it's, you know, if it's a curved pathway, but then it just kind of disappears, and it's like, where does that go? And there's that idea of wonder, and it looks really peaceful. Is it going to lead me to greater peace? And I just think that's a metaphor for the relationship with God. And I think everybody finds some sort of peace in the wilderness, except if you're really, really city boy or something. But and that pathway, and I think we sense God's presence even though people don't recognize it as such. But there's a peace we feel, there's a wonder we feel, there's a beauty.
yeah, and, you know, it's interesting because I have, you know, from a young age, so growing up in Colorado in the mountains, I went to a lot of summer camps, Christian camps, you know, where the focus was on obviously spending time with God out in nature. And to this day, I feel like it does point us towards God. And I know that's a very specific viewpoint, and obviously I have very specific beliefs, but that sense of wonder, that sense of spiritual rest, connection is definitely something that, you know, regardless of your belief, you can still experience to some degree out in nature. And it's interesting because regardless of religious beliefs, almost every religion has some type of nature practice, you know, and so there's something within us that obviously recognizes there's the spiritual side to nature. So Pat, thanks for sharing, you know, your viewpoint, which is super interesting as a professional photographer. I have a couple more questions for you, and then we'll kind of wrap up, and I want to give you time at the end to tell us about what's coming next and what you're doing. But so you've kind of touched on, you know, this, regardless of whether you're a photographer, regardless of whether you're really into, you know, arts, that it's important for everyone. Everyone has this sense of the fact that they need this, you know, experience in nature. So I want you just to touch a little bit more on how this can apply to everyone from your perspective and the experiences you've had as you photographed, all over at least the US. I think you've probably been to more places than that. But why is this something that's important for everyone to consider as part of their, finding rest?
I think today it's difficult to find rest because there's so much going on, whether it's, a lot of people have almost every notification they can that come in on their phone, and it distracts them and it brings them away. We don't find rest on our phones, except maybe if we're listening to, the nature sounds or that people do that stuff or peaceful, restful music, I think. And it's good for us to get away from that. And getting out into nature is a good detachment from that, whether that whatever your faith is or whatever it is, just to get outside and separate from the stress. Because when you're walking away from the man-made world, when you step in outside and you leave, and I do bring my phone outside with me, but I put it on airplane mode, and just because it's there, I don't use it except if I don't have my regular camera. I'll use that as a camera, as I mentioned, but it's turned off because, it's there because one time I used it as a GPS. I was like, where was I? But that's it. We want to get away from those notifications and things that distract us, because our minds just, the more that input comes in like that, the more that fast input comes in, the more stress we have. Where when we're outside, it's not fast input, it's quiet input. And it's not sensory overload. It's the way our senses were designed to pick up things that, to listen to the subtle sounds, because those subtle sounds are what's important, not the ding, 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 or whatever kind of notification you have on your phone. And watching a video of it, it's just that constant sensory input is just not restful. So getting outside takes us away from that.
And then one final question, which is, so it's, we're right at the beginning of July. A lot of families and people are going to be outside this summer on family vacations. Many are going to national parks or other, beautiful natural places. Often, though, what I find and what many people find is that we are now watching the world through our phones, because we're taking videos and we're taking pictures of everything, as we're out visiting. So do you have any advice for folks in that situation? So as you are out on family vacations, etc., what would you advise?
Actually, my family and I are about to go on a trip for 3 weeks. And what I would advise is enjoy the moment. I've written a couple articles on my website about social media and the idea of we take pictures because with the idea of, I want to share it on social media. Why don't we instead maybe take a picture because we want to remember the moment, because we want to document it, or because it's so overwhelming and it's beautiful. But why don't we think about enjoying the moment that we have there, experience it if we're by ourselves. I like to experience moments with God, I'd call it, when there's something there. But if we're out with our family on a vacation, enjoy the moment with who we're with, the family we're with, not thinking about, oh, I'm going to take this so I can put it on social media. And we're walking back to the car from experience something and we're on our phone, we're posting it to social media. Just saw this. I mean, we see that all the time where people are on vacation and here's their daily upload. Don't do the daily upload. Do it. Yeah. Do it when you get back home.
There's been movies and stuff where, you show the kid filming everything and somebody comes up and pulls the phone out and says, look, don't look through the camera.
Yeah. And I notice things. I've had this experience countless times as a photographer. I see something and I want to photograph it and I can't make it work. Situation just happened this weekend. My family and I were just in the house playing a board game, and we noticed out the window just the way the light was after this rainstorm. It's just like, wow. And my son and my wife and I, we went out with this gorgeous rainbow and we just took it in and just like, great. And Then we went out the front. We saw the sunset out the front of the house. We saw the sun was setting. The rainbow was still in the other direction. It was really cool. And I couldn't photograph it. I had a phone and I didn't want to I wanted to think about, let's just enjoy this thing that's God's given me, God's given us. And I tried to take a picture of it. And I did take a few with my phone just because I didn't want to go get my camera and all that. But I was like, I can't get it the way I see it. And so it's just a moment to take in that God's given us at that time. And so enjoy that, because sometimes you can't take a picture of it. And in the meantime, because we were playing a board game, there was 4 of us and my daughter didn't come outside. She went on her phone and was texting her friends. It's like, what are you doing? There's this God-given moment of this gorgeous sunset. And I don't even know why they're beautiful. Haven't figured that one out. On a scientific way, they can tell us, this, that, and the other thing. But why are they beautiful? They're beautiful because we like beauty, and God made us for beauty, and God made us that scene for beauty. And there's no other explanation for it. But it's just like, but take it in. Take it on your vacation. You see that gorgeous sunset. Sure, take a couple photos, but don't take 90 like people. And don't think about posting them on social media. Enjoy the moment with your family. Enjoy the moment. And then, 2 weeks when you get home, post them on social media. Oh, this is what we did this summer.
So Pat, where can we find your website and where can we find your book?
My website is the visualverse.thecreationspeaks.com. I used to have just The Creation Speaks, and then I built this, and it's more popular. And it's a Bible verse of the day with a photograph I've taken of nature, God's creation, and a short devotional thought. And then I also have information on there. There's links about drawing near to God, which I go into the photography, and I've got a download there for 10 quick tips to improve your photography. It's a free PDF that someone can download. And then also on there, you can find my book, which is Drawing Near, Meeting God in His Creation. And there's a link that says devotional book. And the book, in a lot of ways, is an expansion of the website. It's bigger, longer, more in depth. And it's for people who just, we have a busy life. We struggle to connect with God. We struggle to find time in nature. Well, this book helps people mentally at least go to nature and mentally connect with God, because we can't do it. And it's for people who like to do that and want to bring the book out in nature. So it's for both. People want to bring it out in nature. On a rock, sit on a rock by a lake and read the devotional. So it's for those both kinds. So, and you can also buy it anywhere you like to buy books online. It's called, you don't need to go to my website, but anywhere you like to buy books online, it's called Drawing Near, Meeting God in His Creation.
And I'll make sure I put those links in our show notes below so that people can find you. I'll put the name of your book, and I have seen many of your photos and they are amazing. So highly encourage people to check that out. And, especially in our busy world, if you need a quick morning devotional to disconnect from the busyness of our, often lifestyles and want that beautiful photography, highly recommend it. All right, Pat. So what's coming up for you? Tell us real quickly what you're excited about, and then we'll wrap up.
What am I excited about? I'm speaking at a retreat in September. So that's kind of something. I'm speaking to a group of authors in August, but coming right up is the family trip that we're having, and that's going to be a lot of fun. But I'm also excited about an online course I am putting together with this idea of drawing near to God through nature photography. It's not just, and people who want to do it with their phones get a lot out of it. People want to do it with their cameras will get a lot out of it. And it's also a combination of learning photography as well as about drawing near to God through it. Because I found there's people wanting both. They don't just want to draw, and I mentioned this early on, they just don't want to meet God with nature with their camera. They want to learn how to take better pictures of what they see. So this course will do both. It'll help people connect with God, and it will help them take better pictures.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing and for being with us today. And for our listeners, we just encourage you over the summertime to get out into nature. And, there's as Pat mentioned, he's got some quick tips on photography as you're out and about, but use that time to rest and to draw near to God and to renew your spirit. Thanks so much, Pat. We have enjoyed talking with you today.
Right. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I would encourage other people to get outside, go out, get outside and experience it, experience God, experience nature, and experience the world away from the stress, the confusion, and all that's going on out there. Find
Yep.
peace.
That's a good way to end. Let's find our peace this summer.